It's football season and time for the show that examines the X's and O's of the top games for the coming weekend. It's time for the Gridiron Breakdown.
It's time for the Gridiron Breakdown. I'm Jay.
And I'm Alan.
And we are here with the final Power 5 conference preview that we've got heading into the 2018 season. It's time to talk about the SEC. The reigning national championship conference had both teams in the national championship game, which made about half the country's head explode, I think, at one point or another last year, and put on a whale of a show again. Alabama came out on top from that, which is a familiar refrain and a sad one, depending on what kind of fan base you are. But you had exciting players get drafted in the NFL. You had some teams overperform, some teams underperform. It was a pretty busy year in the SEC, and I think the story of the year, honestly, was how good Georgia was, man. I mean, honestly, they were as good a team as you could find in the country up until they dropped one in the regular season to Auburn, but recovered mightily, and up until the last play of a game had the national championship within their grasp.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby Smart really took a huge step forward in year two and just got a team that bought in and played. And, when Jacob Eason got hurt, I mean, nobody knew that Fromm was going to be able to step in there and lead that team the way they did. It's very impressive, the way they improved. Last year was kind of a weird year. You had some traditional teams play just awful. I'm looking at you, Florida and Tennessee. We all knew that Ole Miss with Matt Luke was not going to be very good. We thought for the first time in our lifetime, Jay, we were going to see Kentucky beat Florida, and it happened, but then it didn't happen.
Yeah, as the most Kentucky thing ever to happen and not happen.
But it was a pretty wild year. I mean, you had the two teams who played in the national championship both lost in the regular season at Auburn. So it was kind of a really weird year. Alabama was not its traditional dominant self, so to speak. They did early in the season, but toward the end, due to injuries and kind of just everything that was going on, they really struggled down the stretch. But they managed to right the ship, win 2 playoff games, and take home the golden pencil holder.
Absolutely. And look, other teams did well. South Carolina went 9-4 last year, came up with a great bowl win against Michigan, right? Kentucky got 7-6. Missouri started off as bad as you could get and ended up finishing 7-6 on the year. They were 7-5 on the regular season. We talked about Florida bottoming out. Tennessee bottomed out. Coaching changes there. Derek Mason wasn't able to get Vanderbilt into a bowl, but he improved them a lot. Auburn had that great November and then had the worst December of any team in the nation with the SEC championship and then the Peach Bowl loss to a good UCF team. LSU was a team that started off going sideways and looked like it was about to careen into a ditch, made some changes in the early part of the season, able to finish up, go 9-4. Mississippi State finished 9-4, which is a good year for Dan Mullen. Then Texas A&M, they went 7-6. They got rid of Kevin Sumlin. They bring in Jimbo Fisher with 10 years and $70 million. I'm going to tell you, the fact that Matt Luke got 6-6 out of Ole Miss is enough reason for me that they're keeping him around through this turbulent time for them. He got 3 SEC wins last year, and I have no idea how that happened. And then Arkansas just completely destroyed, Brett Bielema. I don't know, that just never works for some reason. Like, everything he did there, ran a clean program, recruited good players, could never get them off the schneid. They bottomed out last year in the West. So, it was a weird year in that, but I don't know. There's so much about the SEC that going into 2018 that we feel like we have a pretty good sense of, because even with all that turmoil and some of those coaching changes, that there seems to be a lot of just similar.
It does. Now, I will tell you, I'm probably going to knock your socks off on a couple of my picks here. But, it just feels good to be home, Jay. We've traveled around the country and talked about these teams, but these are our teams. They're in our backyard. We hear about them day in and day out. There's a lot of expected of a lot of teams this year. And you know what that tells me? It's not going to happen for about half of those. Like everybody, it's funny, and maybe this is just the way it works, but I hear all these, guys who cover these different teams on the radio, and everybody has hope right now. I heard a guy from Arkansas's radio network just saying how good the Hogs were going to be, and I'm sitting there listening and almost ran my car off the road thinking they're going to be good this year. I didn't see that coming. But it's kind of the silly season, but the SEC is going to be very interesting this year. A lot of people think that it's Alabama and Georgia's to lose. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's definitely going to be in the hunt for another playoff berth. It should be a pretty fun season.
It definitely could be. And let's start in that SEC East a little bit now. Again, to recap, it was Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, Missouri, Florida, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. None of those were bowl teams, at the bottom of the schedule there, finishing stuff up. So how do you see the 2018 SEC East going?
You're going to put me on the spot, huh?
Oh, yeah, man.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that Georgia's the best team. They got Jake Fromm coming back, even though some people think Justin Fields may push him for the starting job, which is pretty hilarious. All the guy did was go undefeated and come within one play of winning a national championship.
That sounds like somebody else, by the way, but we'll get there.
They're bringing back DeAndre Swift, who was just a dynamic playmaker who didn't necessarily get lost. He was just behind Sonny Michel and Nick Chubb last year.
Yeah, two first-round draft picks in the running backs, yeah.
They still got Terry Godwin coming back. They got Kevin Ridley coming back, not to be confused with Calvin Ridley. And then their defense, they're bringing back a cast of characters. I think they got 5 defensive starters returning, but they got a lot of guys who shuffled in and out last year who will be playing. And let's be honest, they've been at the top of recruiting. They finished first in recruiting last year. And, it seems that Kirby's got them going in the right direction. So I got them finishing first. Now hold the presses, Jay. And I am crazy, okay? I have your Florida Gators finishing second in the East because I think the East is going to be a bloodbath this year, okay? I think Dan Mullen will get enough out of Felipe Franks to get that offense going in the right direction. Jordan Scarlett's a great running back. He just hadn't had any passing game to kind of take the pressure off of him. They returned 10 starters on offense and 9 on defense. They weren't necessarily an awful team. They lost a lot of close games last year. They lost to A&M 19-17. They lost to LSU 17-16. Lost to South Carolina 28-20. So they lost a lot of close games last year. They got a lot of games at home this year that sets up nice for them. I think Dan Mullen will energize this team and this program and finish second. Now, here is a team, Jay, that I've been high on. And as of recent weeks, I've actually started selling my stock. I think South Carolina finishes third. I love Jake Bentley. I think he's a great quarterback. And I thought with him and Deebo Samuel, they would really be able to score a lot of points. And I'm not saying they won't. I think their schedule isn't very advantageous with some tough road games later in the year. And it comes down to I just don't trust Will Muschamp. I've seen this story before, and I even started buying it, Jay. We talked a couple of weeks ago, and I was buying it. So I have them finishing third. Fourth, I have Drew Lock in Missouri. I think they're going to be, a 6-6, 7-5 team. Listen, I know Missouri is kind of the obscure SEC team everybody forgets. But if you haven't sat down and watched Drew Lock play football, do yourself a favor and set up to watch one of their games. He had a fantastic year last year, led the conference in passing. He's rated one of the highest draft prospects at the quarterback position coming out this year. Expect big things from him. And while their defense may not be great, they're going to play a bend but don't break defense. Bring back 9 starters on offense, 7 on defense. I think they'll be able to outscore most of their opponents, which is what they did down the stretch. They were hanging 40 and 50 points on people to close out the season, Jay, when they got on that winning streak. So I have them finishing 4th. I have Kentucky finishing 5th, possibly making a bowl game. Mark Stoops' seat may get a little warm there. Their schedule's not awful, but it's not great. And I think the problem for them is they end at Missouri, Georgia at home, at Tennessee, Middle Tennessee State, and then at Louisville, which is always a tricky game for them. They're bringing Benny Snell back, who's had a great career at Kentucky last year. He had 1,300 yards and 19 touchdowns. They're replacing Steven Johnson at quarterback, so they'll have to have an answer there. And their defense has never been great. They're bringing back 8 guys from that defense, but that defense had problems last year, especially in the secondary. Showed up really bad in the Florida game when they couldn't recover, when nobody covered a Florida receiver, not once, but twice, and gave up a touchdown and lost to Florida for the 40th time in a row. Finishing 6th, I have Tennessee. Jeremy Pruitt's got a tough job. The cupboard's not completely bare, but that's not a good Tennessee team. He's going to have an uphill climb, and I have Vanderbilt finishing last.
All right, so to recap, you've got Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. And that's an interesting order, no doubt. I don't disagree with all of it. I disagree with some of the back of it, actually. We're going to get into that. I like you, think Georgia is going to be tops in the SEC East. Now, whether they play Fromm or they bring in Fields, either one, I think, DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield are a great backfield. Terry Godwin and Ridley are great players. Mercade Hardeman is another good receiver. They've got, 3/5 of their offensive line coming back, and the 2 that are coming in are highly touted recruits. They've got a great tight end. And look, they lost some guys on defense. They lost Roquan Smith, which that guy was a stud, no doubt about it. But Natrez Patrick, who's coming in, going to step into basically that role this year, is just as good, I think. And they are going to be good. They rotated a ton of guys in. There's a guy that's coming back for them, though, that you didn't mention, that I think is just as much a weapon. That's Rodrigo Blankenship, the kicker, man. Hit 2 50-yard field goals in the postseason. That's never been done. That dude is ice water. I think Georgia is going to be very, very good and is going to be able to run that table. They got a great schedule, too, Alan. They really do. They open up with Austin Peay. They go to South Carolina week 2. I have everybody circling that game talking about it, man. I got friends that South Carolina fans. They're ready and reared up for that one. That's a big test for Georgia early. But after that, man, they get Middle Tennessee, at Mizzou, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. They'll get a tough game. They go to LSU mid-October. Then they get Florida in the get a week off, get Florida in the cocktail party. Then at Kentucky, then Auburn, UMass, and Georgia Tech to end the season. That's a good-looking schedule for those Bulldogs, man. So I'm joining you there. I've got them in my number 1 spot. I'm not buying as much Florida stock as you are. I do think they're going to be much improved, and I think Dan Mullen's going to do good things with them. I agree with you there. But I'm going to give the edge to the South Carolina Gamecocks because I'm hanging on to my Will Muschamp stock. I think Carolina is loaded up on offense, and they're ready to take that next step forward. Brian McClendon coming in is going to be a good thing for Jake Bentley and those wide receivers with Deebo Samuel coming in. They got Brian Edwards out there as well. They got a good running back in Rico Dowdle. I think that's going to be a good offense and a team that's going to score some points on folks. And that defense is not shabby by any stretch of the imagination. They're going to put pressure up front with Ken Law and Wanham on the defensive line. That's a good-looking team. And then Rashad Fenton, I think, is one of the best DBs in the league. He's a great cover corner. I think Muschamp's going to have South Carolina humming. I've got them finishing in my 2nd spot. I've got Florida finishing 3rd, though, and not far behind because I think the Gators are going to be a lot better. Look, that's a loaded-up team, a lot of talent. They need some direction, and here's the thing they really need to do. They need to stop playing with BB guns and get their heads on straight. I'm serious. Florida's biggest problem has always been discipline. And, as much people as want to knock Miami, the U and the ACC for being this, team that's kind of brash and does a lot of questionable social activities, shall we say, Florida's just as bad. And they got to cut that out. Dan Mullen's already making some of those cuts. The thing I love about them is that, again, their offense sputtered a lot, but they're bringing back 10 guys off of it. They've got C.C. Jefferson as a rusher on defense. I think he's going to be really good for them. I think Dan Mullen is going to do good things. And I like Todd Grantham with an angry defense. So I like Florida at 3rd. I like Mizzou 4th. And I'm going to tell you how they're going to get to 4th. It's that guy you mentioned, Drew Lock. That dude is a stud. Your team gets to play him. You need to watch that. If you're a fan of an NFL franchise that isn't real good, needs a quarterback, you need to start getting to know Drew Lock. That dude is a good football player, has tons of potential for the next level. I think he's going to be good. The funny thing for me is I'm real curious about Derek Dooley, that off-the-radar offensive coordinator hire. That's a different kind of thing. I'll be curious to see how that goes. But, man, they get 3 weeks to iron out the problems. They get UT Martin, they get Wyoming, and at Purdue before they have to play Georgia, at South Carolina, and at Alabama. That's a rough 3-game stretch for Mizzou right there. It's one of my nominees for toughest 3-game stretch. But I think they can navigate that, get a bowl game. Here's where we start to differ, my man. I like Vanderbilt. I think this is as loaded a Vanderbilt team as Derek Mason has ever had. He's got experience at quarterback. He's got experience on his offensive line now. They've got good depth on defense finally, which is something Vanderbilt takes years to build up. I think this year is Vandy's year to take a little step forward. I mean, I'm not sitting here telling you they're going to win 8 games. Don't get me wrong. They're not going back to the James Franklin era. But this is a team that can definitely win 6, if not 7 games. For sure. I think Vandy's going to catch somebody too and surprise them somewhere along this year. I'm not sure where I want to pull that trigger yet, but I like Vandy in the 5 spot. I like Kentucky 6th. I don't think Stoops is in the hot seat. I disagree with you there a little bit. His buyout is huge, and they don't have the money for it, man. Like, they really just don't. And Kentucky, the people that run Kentucky are smart enough to kind of know what they are too. Like, I don't think they over expect things out of him. What would get him fired is if they went like 3-9 or something like that. And I just don't think they will. I mean, yeah, they got to replace Johnson at quarterback. They got a great running back to lean on in Snell. They got a great defensive backfield, man. Their back 7 is about as good as anybody. Josh Allen, one of their outside linebackers, a really good football player. I think they've got some good things happening for them. I think Stoops is going to be able to keep them alive. They're a borderline bowl team for me, but I like Kentucky in the 6th spot. I got to put Tennessee 7th, and I'm not hating on Jeremy Pruitt. Yeah, he inherited a lot of talent, but he's completely cultured rearranging there right now. And, dude, they have – and I'm just spoiling it right now – they have absolutely the worst schedule you could get. All right? They open up with West Virginia and Charlotte. Then they get East Tennessee and UTEP. Then they get Florida, at Georgia, at Auburn, Alabama, at South Carolina, before they play Charlotte, Kentucky, Missouri, and Vandy. That from September the 22nd through October the 27th, that could be a string of bad double-digit losses. I mean, bad losses. A couple of those games, they're going to get housed in. I don't think they survived that much. I think it takes Pruitt at least a year to turn the corner there. I got Tennessee going dead last in the East because I just can't buy it this year. I just got too many questions. And too much of a culture shift again for them to go from champions of life to actually winning games that matter.
Now, Jay, if it makes you feel better, between Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt, I had all those teams winning 5 or 6 games overall. So
yeah,
they were all kind of bunched up there together, but in just a pecking order. That's kind of how I went.
No, and I don't disagree with you. Again, I think Vandy and Kentucky are borderline bowl teams if they can get a couple breaks going the right way. I agree with something you said, though. 2 through 6 is going to kill each other in that division. There are going to be some teams eating each other up. And there's some good games to see along the way. It's time to flip over to the West, my man. And, I'm just going to do the boring thing right now. Alabama's the best team in the West. If they're not the best team in the country already, coming back as, holding the national championship at this point. Yes, they lost a ton of the defense. When's Alabama not had good defense? Yeah, see, it's been over a decade. Now, they've had some injuries, and they're going to have to get the thing is they're going to have to get those defensive backs to grow up a little bit. This is something, if you notice it, you look up a trend, and you go dig it up on Reddit. I threw it out there a couple of weeks ago. Alabama has started to give up a lot of passing yards late in seasons the last 4 or 5 years. Like, their DBs get worn out over this season, which is kind of a weird trend because usually you just couldn't do anything against them. And maybe they're not giving up points. They're giving up a lot of yards. And if you keep giving up yards, eventually that's going to catch you. So they're going to have to grow that defensive up. The thing is, they're going to have the offense to do it. Damian Harris is the most unheralded running back, senior running back in the SEC, maybe in the country. And if they would feed that guy the ball 30 times, he'd win a Heisman Trophy. But they're not going to because they don't have to. They've got Najee Harris behind him, got another bunch of dudes there. They've got Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, Devonta Smith, all at receiver. They're going to be really good. I think the offensive line is going to be good. Irv Smith is a really good tight end. And I don't care which one they play at quarterback. They play Jalen Hurts. They play Tua Tagovailoa. That offense is going to be top notch. And moreover, Alabama's got an incredibly favorable schedule. They open up with Louisville. That might have been an interesting game when it got scheduled a few years ago. It's a 30-point blowout right now. Arkansas State, the best team in the Sun Belt, spoiler alert, but they're not going to be able to hang with Alabama. Go to Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Louisiana Lafayette, at Arkansas, Mizzou, at Tennessee, at LSU after a week off, then Mississippi State, the Citadel, Auburn. The hardest road game is at LSU in November. And that's not a place that Alabama hasn't, done well, by the way. They tend to do pretty good in Red Stick. I had to jump through mental hoops to try to come up with ways for Alabama to not finish first in the West. So I've got Alabama number 1 in the West. My number 2 team might be your surprise, though. I like those Mississippi State Bulldogs, my man.
Oh, you stole it, man. You stole it.
I promise you, folks, we do not share notes before this recording. So just worked out that way. Look, Nick Fitzgerald, Arius Williams, that whole offensive line, all right, and Joe Moorhead pulling the trigger. Plus, here's the other thing. They've got an incredible defensive line. Montez Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons are a problem up front. State's got a good schedule. Stephen F. Austin at Kansas State. By the way, talk about two places that mirror each other. Manhattan, Kansas, and Starkville, Mississippi. And those fan bases. Louisiana Lafayette at Kentucky. Florida Auburn at LSU is a big midseason swing. They're gonna have to try to get 2 out of 3 of those. But I think they can. Texas A&M, Louisiana Tech, they go to Bama late in the season, play them close several years. Arkansas at Ole Miss, they're going to want to get that Egg Bowl back. I like State number 2, man. I just think they're going to be there. Number 3, give me some of that Ed Orgeron, baby. I like LSU. I like the fact that he moved away from Matt Canada. That was not a good marriage, all right? That is not a good fit for his style. People want to bang on Steven Ensminger. When Steven Ensminger was running that offense after Les Miles got fired and after he basically got in there and started taking it over at the end of last year, their production went up. Now, the thing for them is they've got to get competent quarterback play. They're going to have running backs. They're going to have a great line. They're going to have receivers that can make a play. They've got to get competent quarterback play, whether they go with Joel Burnett or they go with Miles Brennan or whoever they go with. However they go quarterback, they got to settle that early, and they got a big test early opening up with Miami, no doubt. Their season, though, is going to hinge on a September 15th game at Auburn. That's going to tell you a lot about both of those teams. They get that one. I think they're on their way to a 9-win, maybe even more season. Probably not more than that at that point because I don't know that they're going to get State. I'll be honest with you. But I think LSU is going to upset some apple carts this year. I think Ed's got something going on. I've got the Auburn Tigers finishing 4th. Look, I think Jarrett Stidham's a top-line quarterback, no doubt. But they're replacing that whole offensive line. We don't know what the backfield is. They tend to start slow. They lost a lot off the defense. They've got a lot coming back, but the Auburn team just scares me, man. Like, they've got a rough schedule. All the toughest game, the best chance they've got to get somebody is LSU at home because they get them at home, but their road schedule is brutal. They open up with Washington. That's going to be hard. They got to go to Mississippi State, got to go to Ole Miss, got to go to Georgia and Alabama at the end of the season. Texas A&M's done really well against them. Jimbo Fisher has owned them. I have too many questions about Auburn for me to pick them higher than 4th. Now they may flip flop with LSU. I'll give myself that caveat out, but I just have too many questions about them. Even though I think Stidham's a great quarterback, he's going to have a great year, and they'll eventually find a run game, but it's just going to take them a little bit. I've got Texas A&M coming in 5th. I like what Jimbo's doing. I think he can right the ship enough to get them back in contention to do well, whether he goes with Nick Starkel or Kellen Mond at quarterback. Their real player is going to be Travion Williams, and when Jimbo Fisher's got a good running back, he can do smart things. They've got Mike Elko coming out of Notre Dame to run the defense. He really improved Notre Dame's defense. I think he's going to be good. Texas A&M is just going to be a year away from really making a big statement, but I think they're going to be a good team. That's a bowl team for sure. I've got them coming in 5th. I got Arkansas coming in 6th. I may be crazy for this, but there's a lot about what they've got that I think actually kind of fits what Chad Morris likes to do. And if he can get good quarterback play out of Cole Kelly, I think they're going to be all right. They've got a good bit of the defense coming back from last year, and they took a beating last year, no doubt. But it got better as the season went on. I think Arkansas can cobble together enough. They might make a bowl, I'll be honest with you. They're like right on the line for me making a bowl. And then coming in last, I've got Ole Miss. Jordan Tamu's a really fascinating quarterback to watch, and A.J. Brown may be the best single wide receiver in the league, but that's all they got. Like, I really don't think they got any depth on defense, nothing else they can do, and they haven't had a running game in years. So I've got Ole Miss finishing last. So my picks for the SEC West: Alabama, Mississippi State, LSU, Auburn, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Ole Miss. So, Alan, I think we know your top two picks, so go ahead and get those out, and then let's hear how the rest of the West goes.
Well, I'm definitely going to pick Alabama to win, like you said. Damian Harris is maybe the most underrated back in the country. You got Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, and Brian Robinson all vying for carries. They're loaded at receiver. They're bringing back the bulk of the offensive line. And you know, the defense, yes, they lost a lot, Jay. They're still bringing back Roquan Davis, Isaiah Buggs, Anthony Jennings, Mac Wilson, Dylan Moses, Christian Miller. And the secondary is going to have to grow up, like you said. But they got some young guys who they think are going to plug and play. Patrick Surtain Jr., they expect him to vie for playing time. They got a transfer who started at LSU who's going to be a junior. And like you said, their schedule is just, it's not that tough. They ease into it. Their toughest games are in November. Plenty of time to get all of that situated. Finishing second, I'm buying Mississippi State. I like Joe Moorhead. Nick Fitzgerald, from all I've heard, that ankle is fine. He's looking good. And last year, their biggest problem is they just didn't get help from the receivers, and the defense was inconsistent. There were some great games that played really well and others that didn't. Montez Sweat and Jeff Simmons are two of the best defensive linemen in the country. Leo Lewis is a fantastic outside linebacker. Their schedule sets up nice. And, you know, everything I've heard about Joe Moorhead, he's one of the guys. Like, one reporter I was listening to said he ran into him at media days and overheard him tell another reporter, hey, I'll text you to let you know if that restaurant's any good. They say he fits in much better there than Dan Mullen did. Not that there were any problems with Mullen, but he just fits that team. So I have them finishing second. I have your Auburn Tigers, Jay, finishing third. I think there are going to be some inconsistencies on the offensive line. That defense, though, is loaded. I think that defense is good enough to carry them to a third-place finish. Now, Jay, I will say this. Can you tell me the last time Auburn won 10 games 2 years in a row?
2004 to 2005?
That would be no.
Oh, wow.
1988 and 1989.
Holy cow. Wow, I did not realize it had been that long. Wow.
Auburn does not win 10 games 2 years in a row.
That's spanning like four coaches, too. That's amazing. Wow.
So I have them finishing third. I think that defense is going to be phenomenal. I think Jared Stidham's a great quarterback. If you need a quarterback for your NFL team, check out this guy. But that offensive line is suspect, and early in the year they may take their lumps. And let's face it, they end the year at Georgia, Liberty, and at Alabama. And, Jay, we've lamented this many times. When's the last big road game Gus Malzahn won?
Yeah, he really hadn't. That's been
Ole Miss 2014 would be the last one that I can remember. So, and then coming in fourth, I've got a tie here between Texas A&M and LSU. Now, you've been buying LSU stock all you can find. I'm just not buying it. I think Orgeron's going to flame out. It won't happen this year. I still expect them to win 7-8 games. Their offensive and defensive line should be good. Their running game will be doable. But, Jay, they got to find a quarterback. And maybe Burrow, the Ohio State transfer, is the guy. Maybe him and Ensminger get on the same page and they light it up. I just don't know that I'm buying it. On defense, you got to watch out for Devin White. That guy is just a straight-up gangster. He will steal your lunch,
yes,
and then eat it in front of you.
Yes, that's a bad man with hate in his heart.
And I think their schedule just isn't great. They pull Georgia as a crossover game. They get Alabama. Of course, they play Florida every year. So they open with Miami, so their schedule's just not great. I'm not saying they're going to be awful, but I'm expecting, 8 wins, which is about what I'm expecting from A&M. I think Jimbo Fisher is really changing the culture out there. I think he's given that team an identity, for lack of a better word. Under someone, I felt like offensively, they kind of knew what they wanted to do, but they kind of didn't. Sometimes they thought they wanted to run the ball, and other times they thought they wanted to go all air raid. I think a lot of that stemmed from the success they had initially with Manziel. I think Jimbo's come in and said, we want to run the ball, play action pass, stretch the field. I think that team is buying what he's selling, and while I don't think they're going to win the division, I think they're an 8-win team. Their schedule does set up nicely. It'd be interesting to see how they managed kind of the early season. I mean, they play Alabama and Clemson in 2 out of the first 4 weeks of the season, so they get trial by fire. Latter half of the season isn't so bad, which is when I think they can pick up a few W's. I have Arkansas finishing 6th. I don't know that they'll make a bowl game, but I think that is just a much better fit than Burt Bielema was with Chad Morris. And that will be a program on the rise in the sense. Morris will be able to get some guys out of Texas that Bielema wasn't able to make inroads with. So he'll be able to maybe steal that 1 or 2 players from A&M or Texas or Oklahoma that Arkansas really needs to excel. Their schedule isn't awful. They ease into it with Eastern Illinois, at Colorado State, and North Texas. They play in the SEC West. We know that's brutal. Luckily, they draw Vandy and Missouri from the East, and while both you and I think Missouri will be good, it's not like they're drawing, South Carolina and Georgia. So they get a reprieve there. And then finishing last, I have Ole Miss. I think with the loss of Shea Patterson, they're going to lose a whole lot. I agree with you. A.J. Brown, he is a bad man and maybe the best wide receiver in the entire country. I don't think he's got anybody throwing him the ball. I think that defense gave up tons of points last year. I think it's happening again. Jay, I think I read somewhere that they gave up over 40 points 4 times and over 30 points 7 times last year. Bad defense, inconsistent offense. That it has 4 and 8, 5 and 7 written all over it, and a last place finish in the division.
I disagree with you a little bit on the quarterback situation. I think Jordan Tamu is pretty good there, but again, I don't think they've got anything else. So we're not too dissimilar there. You've got Alabama, Mississippi State, and you've got Auburn, Texas A&M, LSU, Arkansas, and Ole Miss. So, Alan, it's time. Who do you think's going to win the SEC outright?
Oh, I really did struggle with this because for me, if I say Alabama, I'm a homer. If I pick Georgia, I'm a traitor. I think Georgia's going to be a really good team this year. But until I see one of the pupils beat the master, I'm going to stick with Nick Saban and company. I pick Alabama to win the SEC.
That's not a bad pick, homer or otherwise. I mean, there's plenty of reason to pick Alabama. I'm looking up and down their schedule. I don't even see a loss on it. All right. Thing is, I look up and down Georgia's schedule. I don't see a loss either. I think we got 2 12-0 teams squaring off in the SEC championship game. And I think we're going to see a little return of the Jedi. I think Luke's going to get mad and is going to beat the holy hell out of his master. I think Kirby's coming back for some revenge, man. As much as it pains you to pick Ohio State to do anything good, the next words I'm about to spit out of my mouth make me sick. But I think Georgia's winning the SEC, my man. I think they come back. I think Jake Fromm is going to wind up being invited to New York when it's all said and done. I think he is that good of a quarterback that is going to take a huge step his sophomore year. Got a great backfield to go with, great line, solid defense. And they're going to play the whole year angry and ticked off because they were that close to picking up a national championship for the first time in 38 years. And to get that close and to have that much coming back the next year, it's going to be a motivated, angry team with a schedule that sets up good. I think we're going to get a classic SEC championship, but I'm picking the Dogs, man. I like Georgia to win the SEC outright.
Well, let me ask you this, and we really haven't seen it because we've had teams that lost the national championship come back and win it. How come in the NFL you have the Super Bowl hangover where the team that loses generally falls off the face of the earth the next year, but you don't see that in college football?
I can tell you, man, it is different when it is a business and a job versus the thing that you're trying to build into a career if you're a top line college football player. And I'm not dogging NFL players. I mean, they put their heart and soul and bodies on the line for entertainment. Okay, more respect that I can give them. But I think some of these guys, sometimes they're like, they work that hard over 20 weeks, get that close, and the next year it's like, you know. And I'm going to tell you too, I think the length of the season and the compounding of the beating and the injuries just takes its toll. So it's hard to repeat. It's just hard. What the New England Patriots have done and are currently still doing is an unprecedented run. It's just really hard to do. I think that's it. And I think guys get complacent. Guys move on too. And, you know, you can when you get a college kid and you recruit another 5-star recruit, the great coaches not only recruit them, but what do? They build them back up. Like the first thing they do with 5 stars at Clemson and Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State and all the Oklahoma, all these kind of places is they're going like, okay, kid, you were a stud. Now guess what? You're starting over brand new. And the leadership on the team does it from internally. The coaches do it. And there's just more to mold in college. In the NFL, man, and Nick Saban said it himself, there's only so much I can do to a guy that's making $14 million a year to motivate him, you know? But if I got a kid that's on scholarship and making $1,400 stipend a month, he's got some reason to be motivated. So I think the motivation matters. I think coaching is so much, you know, more about motivation and importance in college. I think that's why you see teams stay in the hunt the way like Alabama and Clemson have been staples in the college football playoff these last several years, because it's just easier to motivate and to maintain quality control over the talent.
All right. I mean, I was just curious because, I mean, we've seen Clemson lose and come back and win, and Alabama lose and come back and win, and we just don't see that in the pros. I think that's a solid answer there. So you think that Georgia's going to be able to retool it, get back to it, and if you're saying they're going undefeated and winning the conference, I imagine you have them in the college football playoff.
I do, but you know what? I'm not going to talk about playoff anymore because next week's show, we're going to do that playoff thing. We're going to go through the group of 5, and we'll hit the independents too. We'll really talk about Notre Dame and BYU and, you know, hit the other ones. And then we'll do our playoff 4 prediction. I'm going to put that off for a week. But yeah, I think the SEC champion is in the playoff. Good games littered across the schedule. I mean, we've talked about some of them. Tons of great players. I mean, I think we've mentioned most of them by name at this point. You mentioned him briefly, but I want to mention again, South Carolina getting Deebo Samuel back is going to be massive for them. Jeffrey Simmons at Mississippi State is a fantastic defensive lineman. Don't sleep on a guy named C.C. Jefferson, by the way, for Florida. I think he is a stud. And Dontavius Russell and Marlon Davidson are guys that just do damage at Auburn up front. They're going to do serious damage all the way. I told you, I think the toughest 3-game stretch is really a tough 5-game stretch for Tennessee. Who do you think has the toughest 3-game stretch?
Well, I mean, I do think that stretch that Tennessee pulls is just absolutely brutal. If I had to pick somebody in the hunt who had a really tough stretch, I would probably go somewhere along the lines of LSU. They play at Florida, they get Georgia at home, and then they get Mississippi State at home.
A tough road for them to hoe all the way. So any other things standing out from the SEC you want to talk about before we wrap up the Power 5 previews, man?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting that, you know, Alabama and Georgia both have QBs who played in national championship games, but they're guys who have very little experience pushing them for the starting job. And just a sheer number of great quarterbacks with Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State, who he's just a physical specimen. The guy's 6'5", 230 and runs a 4.5. Guy can blow you away with his speed. His passing's coming along. And Drew Lock and Jared Stidham. I mean, there's a possibility, Jay, that the SEC might have 2 guys taken in the first round at quarterback this year, which I think if you looked it up, it would have to be the first time in quite some time.
Oh, yeah, I can't even think about the last time that's happened. No, we talked about it when we started our Power 5 previews, the Pac-12 was littered with quarterbacks that you wanted to know. You need to get to know the quarterbacks in the SEC, too. Jarrett Stidham, either Jalen Hurts or Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, Jake Fromm at Georgia, Drew Lock at Missouri. I think Jake Bentley at South Carolina is going to have a big year this year, is going to come along well. I think what Joe Burrow can bring to LSU can be really good for them. I think Felipe Franks is going to do well under Dan Mullen. There's a lot of good players that are going to get good coaching and tutelage. It's going to be fun to watch in the SEC. Should be a really competitive year, particularly spots 2 through 7. And I know it sounds just easy to say chalk that Alabama and Georgia are kind of here and everybody else is there, but really that's the way it is. I mean, just looking at it matchup-wise, it seems to work out that way. That's going to make for some compelling football because the thing about teams that ride out on the top like that is, and this is what NFL teams don't fight as much against, is complacency. You start believing your own hype and reading your own rat poison, right? And the next thing you know, you wind up getting beat by 12, or 20 points to a rival that you didn't expect, and you got to turn around and resurrect the season. So good coaches know how to overcome that. We'll see if these coaches can do that or if anybody can surprise anybody. And that's the last thing I wanted to ask you was, you think a team might be in for a surprise this year?
When you say surprise, like get upset, or are you talking about a team that's going to rise from the ashes?
Talking about a team that might rise up from the ashes.
Well, if I had to pick anybody, I would say it's probably Missouri. I think that they do have the upward mobility depending on how well Drew Lock plays, and if they get that defense locked in, to finish high is second in that division. I think it's far. I don't think it's gonna happen, but if you put me to it, I'd say it's Missouri. Great quarterback play can offset a lot of bad things. Just asked Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Asked all these teams. If you have a great quarterback, a great trigger man, he can get rid of a lot of imperfections.
No doubt about that. Well, man, we are out of time here on our SEC preview. That brings our Power 5 previews to a close, Alan, which means we are one step closer to college football. When we come back next week, folks, again, we're previewing the group of 5. We're going to pick winners out of those 5 conferences, give you some teams that we think are fun to watch, and maybe some games that they're playing against the Power 5 you should pay attention to. We'll talk about Notre Dame and UMass and New Mexico State, and we'll talk about Army and BYU as independents a little bit. And then we'll even talk about a couple of week 0 games, man. There's actually some college football to talk about because the season is here, and then the next thing you know, man, it'll be full-on 2018 college football season.
Yeah, I look forward to it. We're getting closer and closer every day, and soon they'll be kicking a pigskin, and I will be happy, and life will be right.
Indeed, my man. Well, listen, folks, thanks for joining us on this latest edition of the Gridiron Breakout. If you like the show, leave us a review. We appreciate the support. Until next time, for Alan, I'm Jay. You've been listening to the Gridiron Breakdown.
Thank you for listening to the Gridiron Breakdown. Tune in next week for another show. The information discussed in the Gridiron Breakdown is for entertainment purposes only and is not officially connected to the NCAA or any other college football teams discussed.